Welcome to video number 2 for Chapter 8, America Secedes from the Empire. Now we're going to talk about the Patriots and Loyalists. The War of Independence was a war within a war. The Loyalists were colonists loyal to the king who fought American rebels. They were also called Tories after the dominant political factions in Britain. Patriots were rebels who also fought British redcoats. They were called Whigs after the opposition factions in Britain. The American Revolution was a minority movement, and many colonists were either apathetic or neutral to American independence. Patriot militias played a critical role. They took on the task of political education, sometimes by coercion, and served as agents of revolutionary ideas. The Loyalists were about 16% of the American people. Families were often split. Many were people of education and wealth, more numerous among the older generation. They included the king's officers and beneficiaries, and included Anglican clergy and congregations, but the state of Virginia was a notable exception. Loyalists were entrenched in mostly aristocratic New York City and Charlestown, Quaker Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, but were less numerous in New England. The rebels were most numerous where Presbyterianism and Congregationalism flourished. There were tough times for Loyalists during the American Revolution. Oftentimes they were tarred and feathered, as shown in the upper right background, as these Virginia Loyalists were roughly handled by a club-wielding crowd of patriots. Before the Declaration in 1776, persecution of Loyalists was relatively mild. Some did face brutality, such as tarring and feathering, riding astride fence rails. Harsher treatment began after the Declaration. They were regarded as traitors after that, and were roughly handled, some imprisoned, and a few non-combatants were hung. But all in all, there was no wholesale reign of terror. This is a political cartoon called Loyalists Through British Eyes, depicting the Loyalists as doubly victimized, by Americans caricatured as savage Indians and by the British Prime Minister, who offered them very little protection. 80,000 Loyalists were driven out or fled. Several hundred thousand were permitted to stay. The estates of fugitives were confiscated and sold by the Patriots, and some 50,000 Loyalists fought for the British and helped the king's cause by serving as spies or by inciting Indians. But the British, overall, did not make effective use of the Loyalists. General Washington at bay. Washington could muster only 18,000 ill-trained troops to meet the British invaders at New York in March of 1776. Disaster befell Americans at the Battle of Long Island in the summer and fall of 1776. Washington escaped to Manhattan Island, finally reaching the Delaware River. The Patriot cause was at low ebb as the rebels fled across the river. General William Howe did not speedily crush the demoralized American forces at Long Island. Washington stealthily recrossed the Delaware River at Trenton on December 26, 1776, and surprised and captured 1,000 Hessians. A week later, he defeated a small British force at Princeton, and these two life-saving victories revealed the old fox Washington at his military best. The significance of these battles, basically, it allowed Washington to raise his troops' morale and allowed him to keep his army and his soldiers enlisted. This is a likeness of the New York Patriots as they pull down the statue of King George III. This had been erected after the Stamp Act in 1766, and this statue was actually melted down by the revolutionaries into bullets to be used against the king's troops. And we'll continue to look at the battles of the American Revolution in our classroom activities.